Hello friends, I'm Christopher, this is my dog Moose, and in today's video we're going to be taking my old cedar fence, giving it a new life and transforming it into this beautiful modern Shadowbox fence, which is at the same time a beautiful example of art and sustainability for a building project, being comprised of 95% upcycled and repurposed pickets. First, let's take a walking tour of the fence so you can see it in its current deteriorated state. You can learn a little bit about its history, and then we can talk about my plans as they stand right now. Here we are at a familiar site in the back, the playset that I made last year, but it gives you a feel for the fence as it is. It's a cedar Shadowbox style. It has individual cuts, to give it a nice curve at the top of each post. The posts, as I've come to learn, it's a crapshoot whether they're in concrete or just in the ground, which accelerated the deterioration. This fence, according to my neighbors, is about 16 years old, judging by the last picture out their backyard that doesn't have a fence in it. And for a 16-year-old fence, it looks way worse than it should. We talked already about the footings. They were done poorly. The nail work was bad. There's weird rot. The way that this was originally attached, all the posts, you can get a good feel for it right here with the 7.5 million nails just weirdly, put in at an angle, which just accelerated the rot here. Had these all ripping out. We'll be using actual braces. The wind decided to take this down a week and a half ago. So Mother Nature said, "It's your turn. It's time to start your project now." One of the things that I don't like, we like this fence a lot and we love having a fenced-in backyard, which is why I'm putting in the effort to redo it. One of the things that I don't like is that these sections from post to post, they're all over the place. Some of them are like 5 feet, some of them are 7 feet, some of them are 9 feet. So it was a custom individualized job, which is fine, but I like the idea of having a little bit of cohesion, So when I'm doing this, I'm going to have them all the posts at 8 feet, and we're going to have probably 1, 2, 3 stringers to really tie in the center boards there. There'll be a cap along the top. We can talk about design as we get going. Over here, I'm going to be putting a door into the garden. Because as you can see, right, we've got some tomato spikes sticking out there. My garden is actually just beyond this point. So it'll be nice to walk into the garden from the backyard. This is cedar, and I have to say that the boards themselves, at least 85% of them, are in fine shape. In fact, if we get up here, you can see that I already started playing with a power washer. All of these boards, I'm going to take them off panel by panel, and we are going to power wash them clean. All right, just look at that for a moment. You can see the old grayed out, kind of mildewy fence. And then once it's power washed, like the best washing is this one on the left, it almost looks brand new. So each board is going to get pulled off, power washed, lightly sanded, and then resealed. They're also all going to get a fresh cut on the top to the length of the shortest board here, which is about 5.5 feet, shall we say. And I think that should be fine because we still want to maintain the height of our fence, about like here. But if you put a 2x4 cap or a 2x6 on top of that and extend it along the way, we're really not going to be losing that much height. You can see that over the years, the squirrels have just enjoyed running across this and eating it and chipping away at it. So a fresh cut will make that look nice, and a cap on top of it will just improve it all the more. If I step back, sorry about the shade this time of day, you can really see how this post right here is leaning. Can't believe it hasn't fallen. Actually, it hasn't fallen because the prevailing winds come at us like this so far. So those will all be coming out. I'll be renting an auger. Everything's going in concrete. We're going to be sealing the base of all of our posts. All sorts of stuff. Then one last thing to see. See this door? This is just a prefab door, right? Whatever they got from the store. It's a standard door size. Of course, this post down here has deteriorated so badly that the door, you have to rock it like this in order to get it to lock. If I back up here, take a look. Can you tell that this is on an angle, aside from, of course, this fallen piece? If you look way down there, that's actually where the fence should be. So we're going to continue that line straight, and the fence will come out, probably a solid 2.5 feet from where it's standing. So we're toying around with the idea, oh, that's Moose, he wants to get out, of either a wider door going straight in like that, or else having the fence stop here, put a wide door on an angle, and then mount it into the side of the house. So we've got some creative decision making to do, but for that process, I've got to take out some of the pickets in my garden, move the fence around the blackberries, all sorts of stuff. So enough talking, that's the history of it. Let's get started on the rejuvenation. Well, here we go. The fence itself is a long fence, about 400 feet. And none of the steps are horribly difficult in and of themselves. It's just a long process for one person to do entirely alone. So many small steps add up to one great big work. Here you can see I put on a fresh bit for my reciprocating saw that could go through nails and wood, and I'm just prying down the fence panel sections right at the post. Once they got taken down and lined up, I whacked out all of the nails and pried them off with a tiny pry bar and actually the old framing hammer that I used to build the shed. That was a pretty big bucket full of nails when all was said and done. Good personal protective equipment is important for this particular project. I'm wearing either an apron or bibs depending on the time of year for the entire thing. And safety glasses too, because bits of nail will fly off when you're cutting or hammering them out. And my ear protection too. A reciprocating saw just a couple inches away from your head. You do that a lot, it's really going to get you. Gross. Look at all those earworms squirming around at the bottom of the rotten fence post. Well, this was a time-consuming process, but not overly difficult. I probably got it down to less than 2 minutes per picket. But you can see me hacking away, prying them out. These were relatively easy to get off of the rails because the person who installed these cut corners. These were not galvanized nails. They were not rim shank nails. They were just smooth. And in time they had rusted, so there wasn't as much material. You can see I'm just prying them off quite literally. So I got lucky there. Pressure washing was so much fun, but time-consuming. This was by far the most time-consuming part, and relatively labor-intensive because I'm hunched over a little bit, making sure I'm getting these perfect lines going up and down each board. Except, of course, in this shot where I'm going zigzag just for the fact to get that effect out for the camera, and it does look pretty wicked. But pressure washing is powerful, and it was an important part. All these pickets that I took down, I pressure washed to get off the old weathered gray exterior, and it exposed some of the fibers too, so that when I sealed it a little bit later, it really soaked in and it retained its new nice amber color. We have here 285 perfectly usable boards. These were what were pulled off of all of the fence panels. Every one of these was power washed all the way around. Next, they're going to get a fresh cut on both sides, all become the exact same length, which will be about 5.5 feet, and then they'll be stained. Had I purchased these boards new, the closest equivalent is a 6-foot board, right? A fresh 1x6 cedar board, $15 a piece. That's the lowest cost of my nearest hardware supplier. $15 a piece for 285 boards is about $4,200. That's huge. Think about that cost, and that's before delivery, because this is a lot. I'd want this delivered. It's before dumping fee to getting rid of the old ones. It's huge. I was taking so long. It took forever to do all that power washing, and it'll take forever to do that side and behind me. But when you put a dollar value of $4,000 here, that's $10,000, $11,000 in lumber cost alone for the boards for my entire perimeter. And I'm saving that cost, not to mention saving this from being dumped or burned or just tossed away. It's good to think about.
Of the posts I was removing, some were in concrete, some were not. Really no form or faction to it. So when I started doing this, I actually got a jack to think, oh, I could pry these out and take the concrete balls out. But, as I wrapped the chain around the bottom of these posts, the posts just ripped out because they were completely rotted. So for me, the concrete is still on the ground, and I just positioned my holes to go around them as I was surveying. The posts I just had to rock back and forth, and they were so rotten that they ripped out. I bought myself a nice surveying level, and I used that to make sure I had a nice straight line, and I used those little flags every 8 feet to mark the center approximately of my holes. You can see I'm using a string line too. So the fence that I took down, the bottom of the pickets were touching the ground or covered by mulch, and the tops of the pickets had been chewed over the years by squirrels. So the top and bottom needed a fresh cut, and I went with the length of the shortest board for each, which happened to be about 64 inches. Since I installed the fence at least 2 inches high off the ground, and I cap it with a 2x6, which we'll see in a little bit, the average height of the fence is still what it was before, but it's so much better because there's airflow underneath. And of course I had a little bonfire with my cutoffs here.
Alright, check it out, they're all done. They did in 3 hours what I've been putting off for 10 years. Da 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 da. Oh, it's so satisfying. I could cry. Oh man, just out of this world. Look at this, was all that rotting logs. It's gone. I'm free. I'm free.
If you've got a fence, you know what it's like. Stuff growing along the perimeter tends to grow into the fence. I had tree branches to trim, I had bushes to cut and remove, and then I had to actually get rid of some 40, 50-year-old wire fence from my neighbors that had actually grown into some of the property line trees. Because, 80 years ago, they wouldn't put up fences necessarily, they just planted trees in the property line, as we can see. Had to rent some pretty thick bolt cutters for that job. I purchased an earth auger for this project. I had 42 holes that needed to be dug, and I was not going to do them by hand. At first I thought I could just borrow a buddy's ice fishing jig, but that was not the case. I'm happy that I bought this. It was relatively inexpensive, $350, totally worth it. The hole width is about 3 times as wide, as the posts. You know, they're 4x4 posts, so 3.5 inches wide times 3 is 10.5 inches. So a 10-inch diameter auger there is just fine. They go well below my frost line. Each hole is about 2 to 2.5 feet down. And as you can see, I had to dedicate a chainsaw blade to cutting out roots up to a certain thickness, and I had a 42-inch crowbar to pry out rocks. Big suckers as big as my fist in every single hole. What a great workout. I highly recommend buying one of these if you have a lot to do. The posts were a big point of failure for the last fence, so I went strong in the opposite direction. I made sure that I was digging the holes plenty deep enough. At the bottom of each hole, I put about 4 inches of gravel for drainage at the bottom, packing it down nicely, as you can see. I'm using the old rails as stabilizers, so I would put one in each direction. They would balance out, I would level it with a level, and then I would pour my concrete. Now, you can watch YouTube videos until you're blue in the face and read forums. Everybody has their own opinion on what kind of concrete you need to use, but I ended up using Quickcrete, or whatever the analog was at my big box store, fast-setting dry concrete. It was rated for this kind of job in my cold climate. I ended up going through about 2 to 2.5 bags per pole for me there. I'm using a string line between posts to make sure that I have a nice straight line. You don't want the posts actually touching it. When you're putting them in, just make sure they're approximately far away from it, all of them. It worked really well for me, and I made sure that I had the appropriate spacing between each of them. 8 feet there. Thumbs up. None of this is rocket science, but it's one heck of a workout, and you want to make sure you take your time at this part because, this is where you're going to have either a straight fence or a crooked fence, depending on if you're rushing. So make sure those posts are perfectly plumb and a nice straight line for whatever you're working on. Don't be cheap. You like that musical interlude? You spent all this time and money and talent putting up a beautiful fence. Take the extra step. Seal your stuff. Stay in it. Do what you gotta do. It's going to look so much better and increase the life expectancy of your fence.
Well, yesterday I was out there staining the posts. The temperature tolerance on these is up to 35 degrees. It was 49 when I was staining them, and they had a sunny, clear time for about 18 hours, and then there was a cold snap and it snowed overnight. I'm happy to say I went out and I checked all the poles, and they're doing great. There's no sign that there's any kind of bad form with the snow on them, so what a freak thing.
That's right, Christopher the Past. What a freak thing. Well, in a couple days, the weather was back in the 50s, so I went back at it. Got all of my new rails out there, and the posts, of course, were up by this point. I'm using a spray gun for this. I invested in one a couple years ago when I was building the shed and the fire rack, and I also use it for the play set. Saves a ton of time. You can fill it up a quart at a time. You just run a electrical cord out there. Bada bing, bada boom. Makes things go so much quicker than setting up sawhorses and doing everything with a brush. Of course, remember to wear gloves. I'm using an exterior stain and sealant recommended for decks and fences that can tolerate my particular climate. Oh yeah, and I also power washed and resealed my nearly 10-year-old compost pile. This is the very first project I did after we bought the house. This is a laser level, some surveying equipment. It was mid-range, maybe $250 worth it. You can see here I'm tracing the line over to this laser, making sure that the height on one end is the exact same height as the other end. It's a small detail, but I absolutely love it. I use that to set the height of the top rails, and then I used a spacer to get the middle and the bottom rail. I'm doing 3 because the last fence had 2 and there was too much warping. That top rail for me is also going to be an added piece of support for the rail cap, as I call it. I use fence brackets in this case instead of just, toenailing in nails or screws. It's nice. If I ever need to remove a section, I just unscrew things. I think that'll be great. Galvanized screws, of course. And this is a great job here for my eldest daughter, Charlotte. She's 4 here. She can help mark the lines and screw in screws. Try to incorporate my kids whenever it's plausible for them and safe to do. And fun. Good memories with Dad. Yes, I can already hear the comments being typed, calling me a schmuck for using a chainsaw to cut off those posts. But it worked just fine for me. Could have used a reciprocating saw, could have used a circular saw, whatever. The whole point was I made sure that they were longer, and I cut them off after the fact so that they could all be the exact same level. I added a little bit of stain on top of that just to protect it once they were all cut flush with the top of that top rail. And you can see here I'm putting on, as I call them, the rail caps. That's a 2x6 going right over the top, bloop, and then I screw them into the ends of the posts and to the sides of the rail. This adds a lot of structural rigidity. And then the pickets will be going up and effectively bumping up underneath that, minus maybe 1/8 of an inch, for them to expand and contract appropriately. I like doing carpentry, but I really like doing woodworking. So the fence for the most part was good carpentry work, and then the arbor and the gate itself were more detailed woodworking. I had to take things into my shop. Form meets function. The form here is beautiful, and it draws attention to the entrance, and it goes well with the aesthetic of my house and the gate into the garden. And the function, this is about 8 feet on center from the posts and 8 feet tall. I could drive a truck back there if I wanted to now. Now finally, after all that time and all that work, you do the thing that people from the sidewalk will actually see and go, huh, that looks nice. So there are those beautiful pickets after they've been taken down, power washed, resealed, recut, and installed. My dog Moose was so happy to be out in the yard without his leash now that we had the perimeter up again. Such a good boy. But it's showy. The pickets look great. I used a 2x4 as a spacer in between. Previously they had been 4.5 inches spaced apart. I wanted them a little bit tighter. And I used the spacer on the inside, and then the outside I just eyeballed it. There is no bad side to this fence. You get a good one and the neighbors get a good one. I used exterior grade screws doing this. I want to say they were 2-inch screws, triple coated for this type of wood and this type of environment. 2 screws in each rail, so 6 screws per picket. And I had to take some glamour shots in the sunset, and it felt so satisfying finally getting the perimeter back up. We have a fence. Well, I've always had a fence really growing up, but it's for the safety of our dog, for the safety of our kids, and we like a little bit of privacy, and this certainly provides that. This is before stripping, and after staining. Doesn't that look great? I'm very proud of the work. Hey, we're not done yet. I've got to talk for 3 minutes about making a gate. Now, I went with a double wide gate, as I talked about a little bit when I was describing the arbor. Here's that woodworking technique as I was doing. For the frame, I made lap joints. So I just put my dado stack down, and you can see I'm gluing and screwing them together. This will provide more structural rigidity to the frame, as opposed to just putting a 2x4 on top of another 2x4 and then screwing it in and relying on the shear strength of the screws. I'm also using diagonal bracing. This will help the fence, well, not sag in time, and also that big X there is where I'm going to screw the actual pickets onto. Mounting the gate with the hinges was relatively difficult, not so much because of the weight, this being all cedar, but mostly because of the wonky size. Even for a large man like myself, if you have help from a friend, I'd recommend it. I'm just using spacers at the bottom and clamps creatively. I'm using one more hinge than the weight capacity recommends on the package, just to make sure I have more than enough support. The cane bolts at the bottom are going into a piece of pipe. As I said here, I'll be fixing that in the spring when I regrade the slope. I'll put it in concrete properly, but this will do just fine for the winter until I dig them out in the spring. And what kind of woodworker would I be if I didn't use my scrap 2x material to make a latch and a locking pin and handles? Kind of phallic, I know, but it gets the job done. Ooh, satisfying. I call this layer the subfascia. It's the big part of what you see, and then the main fascia is a decorative layer that goes on the top, outmost edges. It covers up where the boards come together, and it covers up the 2x4s. You only see the 2x4 skeleton from the inside of the fence. Everything is custom designed. I took inspiration from things on Pinterest, but I just made up the plans on my own. I don't have actual plans to share, so be creative if you're going to do something like this yourself. Take on the challenge and go for it. Fun fact, it was about 61 degrees while I was sealing here, perfectly well within the tolerance, and within 36 hours it had dropped below the 30s, and we got a couple inches of snow. This is as good a time as any to make a plug for my Instagram page. It's Christopher Ulrich, just like my channel. Some of these pictures were for that. That's a reel of me dip sealing the handles as I designed them and batched them out. Ooh. Ah. And of course I branded it.
I really like this particular shot because you can see the fence, which I made, the playset that I made, the firewood rack that I made, the shed that I made, and the compost bin that I made. Ta-da! Videos for everything except the compost. We did that right when I bought the house, before the YouTube channel. Ah, good stuff. And there you have it. I've bared my soul to you on this long project that started in earnest in August and ended in the middle of November. I braved some freezing temperatures and some scorching temperatures and learned a whole bunch of things along the way. Would I do it again? Yes, in a heartbeat. Thanks a lot for sticking around. If you liked this, be sure to check out some of those deeper dive videos. There are 7 of them right now. And of course, there's the short form video if you need something fun and quick. Have you built a fence like I did before? Are you about to build a fence? I hope this has been helpful for you. Be sure to leave a comment down below and let me know anything that's on your mind. Thanks for watching. I've been Christopher. Have a great day. Happy building. Bye.